Look, you hosted your predictions webinar for our pro subscribers
Yep.
last week, I think it was, and there was a lot there. And what I want to do is I want to give people a little bit of a taste of the highlights of that. And so walk us through some of your biggest predictions for 2026.
Absolutely. So, I am really predicting major tech layoffs. And I think perhaps this is surprising because everything seems up and to the right, and there's so much exuberance in the tech economy, but also a lot of questions. And so, first off, I think that the combination of cost pressure on these massive AI infra spends, and also the fact that these big companies can do more and more efficiently, I think is going to lead to very substantial layoffs. We've seen a small drumbeat, and I think that will accelerate in 2026 for sure. So feel confident about that one. And I think it's an interesting one because it shows sort of this dichotomy that has started this year, this exuberance, but this paranoia, this invest for growth, but keep belts tight elsewhere. So I think that will continue.
So if you had to pick one company that you think for certain, I mean, is there any one name you're looking at? Is it a hyperscaler? I mean, who
So
are we thinking about?
I think the Amazon's, Microsoft's, Google's, Meta's, Salesforce's act in concert. I mean, if there's one thing I've learned in 20 years out here covering big tech companies is there's a lot of looking and seeing. I mean, I guess I've learned many things, but they really act in concert. It's like there's a window where you have permission from the markets, permission from the talent markets to belt tighten. So I actually think it's not a question of problems at one company, although everyone's got their issues. And I'm also predicting that we'll see, instead of like a tailwind that rises all boats, some real winners and losers when it comes to the major big cap tech companies. But I think when it comes to layoffs, it will be across the board.
Okay, so now we published a story this week about how the organizational structure at OpenAI has led to some of the challenges with ChatGPT over there. I wonder how you're thinking about the ChatGPT Gemini rivalry. Do you have any predictions there?
I think it will continue, and I do think that it's a momentum game when it comes to some of the capabilities of the models. I do think all models converge to some respect, although they also diverge in terms of their specialization. But I think Gemini's momentum is going to continue. And I think we're going to see another major tech player, maybe on the enterprise side, probably enterprise versus consumer, really adopt Gemini and maybe sort of throw in the towel on some of their own custom model development, and really figure out that that's not the place to play. I mean, perhaps Apple is foreshadowing this a little bit in that we've seen it go first with OpenAI, but now more deeply Gemini for Siri. Although Apple is still committed to its own foundation model development, we hear. But I think if you zoom out and you look across consumer and enterprise, I think more and more CEOs are going to make the calculus that this is not the CapEx race, the research race, the talent race they want to be in, and that they want to get their edge, they want to get their margin in their more custom use cases and use other models. Now, we've obviously seen this in search. We've seen this in many other paradigms in consumer tech. And I think Google, with all its relationships, is really poised to make a move here.
Right. Okay. Now, speaking of predictions,
Yes.
what do you make of these prediction markets? I mean, how do you think that story changes in 2026?
Well, first, what a story of 2025. Kalshi, Polymarket, not only just in their user growth, but in their embedding in the traditional financial system with partnerships with New York Stock Exchange and more traditional institutions. The information broke a week or so ago, news that Coinbase was partnering with Kalshi, which came out this week. Wouldn't quite call Coinbase a traditional financial institution, but it's on its way.
It's more traditional than the prediction markets in some ways.
That is where we've ended up. Yes, but and it certainly wants to be. So incredible momentum. But I think 2026 is going to be a very, very tough year for the prediction markets because I think the regulators are finally going to catch up. This reminds me of when Uber kind of came roaring into the taxi and ride hailing market and said, all the traditional regulations around this, they don't apply. And it got them great momentum. And then it got them years and years of battles with regulators. Now, this is kind of how tech plays out. And I definitely don't think it spells doom for these prediction businesses, which are fascinating. But I think in terms of where the energy and momentum and time spent is going to be next year, it's going to be pushback from the states on sports betting. I mean, I just don't believe that the states are going to turn a blind eye when so much revenue is at stake for them. And I think that will play out in other areas as well. So I think adoption will continue, but there could be some recalibration. There could be some changes to the business model. There could be some deal cost cut for those platforms to see the next phase of growth.
And I think, I mean, to your point, all it would take is really one mega trade. We've written about some of the suspicions around insider trading on these platforms, stuff like that. I mean, really all it takes is one wake-up call, as we've seen with crypto and maybe with predictions markets, to change the entire game. I want to ask you about,
of course. I do, to be clear, if there's so many lessons from 2025, but finally seeing the Google monopoly search deal come to a close, which, let's face it, is not the most pressing issue in the technology sector over the last 6 months. We've moved beyond it. I am in the camp that this regulation, ultimately doesn't, tilt these companies or destroy them. But in terms of the ins and outs of what they're going to be spending their time on, what headlines you're going to see, how products are going to adjust, I feel that's a certainty for next year.
right. What about media? I mean, this has been a crazy 2 weeks for media, not just with the Warner Brothers, Paramount, Netflix saga, but we just saw this week that YouTube is getting the Oscars. How do you think that story
Sure.
changes in 2026?
You just can't bet against YouTube. I actually predicted on my podcast with some friends of my husband this week that a creator is going to win an Emmy next year.
Okay.
We'll see. But I do think that the sort of YouTubeification of media, or whichever direction we're going in, is a real thing and pretty unstoppable. And I think ultimately, people who exist only on YouTube, not like then license a show for Netflix,
Right.
have a real shot at an Emmy. So that was a different prediction I made. In our industry, Akash, I think it's more troubled waters in media. I think we are going to see a lot of publications realize that people aren't reading their stories because they're not original. When even our best institutions doing excellent journalism, like the Times, are pushing us into other experiences. When I open my Times app, there are 5 tabs and only one of them is news and 4 of them aren't. And that's the main interface to the New York Times app. So the Times is a leader, and I think others will really push that playbook. And that's gonna, potentially mean fewer or less attention and fewer resources to certain types of journalism across the industry. So I think it will be tumultuous and, more of the same, and probably consolidation as well. So I would look out for those of our listeners who are into the inside baseball of the digital media landscape. I would look out for many more airmail Puck like tie-up tuck-ins. This is when Puck bought airmail earlier this year, having very common ownership on its investors. So I think that consolidation, we'll see what plays out with Netflix, Warner Brothers, and Paramount. And I think that mentality will trickle down as well.
Well, let me ask this very quickly. If there's an Emmy in 2026 for a creator, is it Mr. Beast or is it somebody else?
I think it's someone else. I think it's someone else.
Okay.
I think the
All
field's
right.
open.
Great.
I also think that this is on YouTube's radar. I think I've spoken to creators who said they're going to YouTube saying, "Help me win an Emmy." And I think these companies and creators are great executors, and so I think it's going to happen.
Great. Well, Jessica, it was great to have you on. Look forward to seeing all those predictions, how they in turn actually evolve in 2026. It's going to be a busy year, I'm sure. And thank you again. That is Jessica Lessin, our editor in chief here at The Information.